This week, I'll be discussing Chapter 4, which covers the different states of consciousness we experience during the course of our lives. Sleep, dreams, and sickness are a few topics covered, as well as hypnosis, meditation, and drugs. Let's dive right in. Let's start by defining consciousness. What is it exactly? It has been a field of study for thousands of years, and yet there is no clear, definitive explanation that everyone can agree upon. Where does it come from? Does it have a location? Is it in the mind or the brain or somewhere else? Can it reside outside the body? Many questions still abound. However, for purposes of this class, we will keep it as simple as we can by defining it as the awareness of the sensations, thoughts, and feelings we experience at any given moment. It is your own individual awareness of the world inside you and around you, made up of your thoughts, beliefs, memories, feelings, and sensations. As our awareness changes, so changes our conscious experience. It is a flowing and fluid experience. If you recall from Lecture 1, I talked about stream of consciousness, where psychologist William James compared our consciousness to a stream, which is a continuous and unbroken experience despite all the fluctuations in our thoughts and emotions. Put another way, it is an ever-shifting stream of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that can dramatically change from one moment to another. You can be listening to this lecture and then think about how hungry you might be, which then reminds you of dinner you had last night. And then you notice that your stomach hurts, and then you might discover that you're cold, and on and on and on. To hear it, you might think that it would feel clunky and jerky, but we tend to experience it as smooth without requiring much effort on our part. We can be conscious of our internal state, so that's what's happening inside us, like butterflies in the stomach when anxious or warmth in the heart when happy, and we can also be conscious of our external environment, which includes people, places, things, events, and so on. Our brains can give us quite a bit of information of what is happening in our different states of consciousness, so let's take a look at that now. What is happening in our brains during different states of consciousness? Let's go ahead and take a look. This image shows different brain activity based on different states of consciousness using a device called an EEG that measures electrical activity in the brain. Again, remember that this is not a biology class, so I'm going to keep this general and brief, focusing primarily on how brainwave activity relates to mental states or the level of alertness of an individual. Let's first take a look at the waking state. As we can see in this image, gamma waves are cycling quickly with rapid low amplitude activity. So this is a state where we are highly alert and aware, and it's associated with the formation of ideas, language, and memory processing, as well as various types of learning. Beta waves are also fast and irregular, and this shows we are awake and alert. And this is generally the mental state most people are in during the day and most of their waking lives. Alpha waves are smooth and regular, and this is a state where we are awake but relaxed and not doing much processing of information. Think about when you might be listening to music or sitting in front of the TV watching your favorite show. It's interesting to know that when we close our eyes, our brain automatically starts producing more alpha waves. And now with theta waves, brainwave activity is getting slower and smoother, and this is when we enter light sleep. And then we finally enter delta waves, the slowest and the smoothest, which is associated with deep and dreamless sleep. As you might be noticing, the more relaxed we get, the slower our brain wave activity becomes. As our brain activity changes, our states of consciousness change. So what happens when we enter into an altered state of consciousness? This comes about due to a change in brainwaves, which can cause a person to lose a sense of identity with their body or with their normal sense perceptions. Think, for example, if you've ever been dizzy and the room may feel like it's actually spinning. Now, altered states can happen either unintentionally or intentionally. Let's take a look first at what might cause unintentional altered states of consciousness. Some causes for altered states of consciousness that happen unintentionally include fevers, neurotransmitter imbalances, oxygen deprivation, sleep deprivation, accidents or crisis situations, and trauma. This is by no means an exhaustive list, as there certainly are a number of other causes that can bring about an altered state of consciousness. But let's take a look at some examples from the list we have here. Let's look first at sleep deprivation. If you've ever been sleep deprived, depending on the severity of the lack of sleep, you may start to hallucinate. Some people have actually reported seeing objects in the road when driving, like a horse or a cow that is not actually there. This is definite distortion of one's sense perception. Other people have reported feeling outside their body, otherwise known as an out-of-body experience, which certainly can affect one's sense of identity. Let's take a look now at another example. How about if you've ever been in a car accident? You may have noticed that time slows down or speeds up, thereby changing one's perception of time. Time certainly doesn't change, but the perception of it does. Something you may have noticed on this list is that these are causes that are not due to lifestyle, but to events typically outside our control. Let's turn now to those causes where we are making the choice to alter our state of consciousness. Some causes for altered states of consciousness that happen intentionally include hypnosis, chanting, meditation, fasting, entheogens, which is a chemical substance typically used to generate the divine within, can be a psychedelic but doesn't necessarily have to be. Light and sound stimuli, some examples of those can be music or drumming, and sensory deprivation. Example here is a float tank. I'm not going to go into too much detail here since we'll be exploring some examples of these in class, and you may have some of your own that you'd like to share. Let's talk now about the stages of sleep, since it is an activity that we spend about a third of our lives in the state. Let's look again at what's happening with brain wave activity. As we can see from this image, there are 4 stages in the sleep cycle. Stage 1, marked by rapid, low-amplitude brainwaves. This stage is considered the transition from wakefulness to sleep. Stage 2, which is slower and more regular, with some brief bursts of rapid brain activity called sleep spindles. This is when we're truly asleep. Stage 3, higher peaks and lower valleys, where we're getting into a deeper sleep. And the deepest stage, Stage 4, which has low frequency and high amplitude brainwaves, and where we are least responsive to outside stimuli. Sleepwalking actually occurs in this stage. This is thought to be the stage where we get refreshed and our system gets a reboot. The section to the right side of the image mentions REM sleep, and I'll be discussing that in a moment. But why is sleep necessary at all? The 8 or so hours of relative inactivity associated with sleep has some advantages for our bodies. It reduces our energy expenditures so that the body's resources can be used for tissue repairs and growth. That's one reason why infants and young children sleep so much, and why older adults sleep less and less as they age. Sleep also seems to be important for the brain's work of organizing and consolidating the memories of the day's events. The stage of sleep known as REM, which means rapid eye movement, is generally indicated by a back and forth movement of the eyes. Generally occurs in stage 1 of sleep, goes through a 90-minute cycle, is the stage of sleep that is generally accompanied by dreams, and where muscles appear to be paralyzed. During REM sleep, most motor neurons are inhibited, which produces a kind of paralysis that keeps people from hurting themselves during a dream. It might interest you to know that people who walk or talk in their sleep do so during stage 4, the deepest sleep stage, and not during REM sleep. Let's take a look now at a visual of what happens during sleep. As you go through a typical night, initially you spend more time in deep, slow-wave sleep, but shift to more REM sleep as morning approaches. After you fall asleep, you reach stage 4 within about 45 minutes and have your first REM period after about 90 minutes. The first dream is short, but later REM periods can last up to an hour. As you can see in this image, most of the stage 3 and stage 4 sleep occurs in the first half of the night, while REM sleep occurs mainly in the second half of the night. So getting to bed too late, which reduces the total hours of sleep you have, tends to cut mostly into your REM sleep time. I've been talking about the stages of sleep and REM sleep where dreams occur. Now let's move on into the meaning of dreams. There are 3 main theories I'll be discussing here, the first of which is unconscious wish fulfillment theory by Sigmund Freud. This theory says that dreams represent those wishes that the dreamer subconsciously wants to be fulfilled. There are 2 major components to this theory. One is the manifest content, which is the obvious meaning behind a dream, and the other is the latent content, or the hidden meaning behind a dream. Dreams have both a manifest and latent meaning, and Freud believed to truly understand a dream, the manifest meaning has to be picked apart to know the latent or hidden meaning. Freud also believed that a person's dreams were so unpleasant that the mind created a less threatening version of the dream, which could be considered the manifest meaning. Let's take a look at this image and see if we can understand it from an unconscious wish fulfillment theory. If we were to look at it from the manifest perspective, we can see here that people are climbing up a ladder and being up in the clouds and celebrating and being joyful. Now, from a latent perspective, this could be seen as the wish for sexual fulfillment, as the ladder going up into the clouds is an indication or a symbol of sexual intercourse. So this could be the dreamer being frustrated and having an unconscious desire, maybe for someone who's inappropriate to have sexual intercourse with. Another symbolism here is the moons or planets up in the upper left that, according to Freud, the latent meaning could be considered um, breasts. And so there could be some conflict about that as well, and usually has something to do with the mother, with one's mother. Now let's look at some symbols that Freud has described as having important implications for his particular theory. So, for example, the male symbols: bullets, snakes, sticks, umbrellas, hoses. We can see here that there's a phallic emphasis here, and fire, knives, guns, that there's actually a violent or aggressive component to these symbols. So we can see male symbols as being those that are sharp and long and have certain qualities that are active. We can look at female symbols and see here we have ovens, boxes, caves, bottles, and these are symbolic of the womb. And typically these are seen as more passive. We can see here apples, peaches, and grapefruits that are indicative of female breasts. Symbols of intercourse here: climbing stairs, crossing a bridge, riding an elevator. We can see here that there's some kind of penetration going from one area to another and moving through. And there's a lot of sexual implications to Freud's theories, and we're going to spend some time exploring and discussing and doing some activities and exercises with this particular theory, and actually all three theories. So next we'll move on to the dreams for survival theory. The second theory is the dreams for survival theory. This theory permits one to reconsider and reprocess information during sleep that is critical for one's daily survival. It utilizes the cognitive approach as it focuses on thinking, understanding, and knowing about the world, that then gets translated into the dream state as a way to learn and to develop memories. The third theory is the activation synthesis theory. This is the theory that says random electrical energy occurring during REM sleep stimulates random memories that are then turned into a storyline. This may be due to changes in the production of particular neurotransmitters. This theory holds that REM sleep triggers memories that are lodged in the brain, and the random electrical impulses that get fired during sleep trigger these particular memories and create a narrative that seems to make sense to us. This approach utilizes the neuroscience or biological approach, as the focus is on how neurons fire within the brain. As I mentioned earlier, we'll spend time exploring these three theories in class. Another form of dreams are daydreams. Daydreams are those fantasies that people construct while they're still awake. Daydreams tend to be pleasant, and it's a way that the brain consolidates learning that happens throughout the day. Daydreams can be a helpful aid in problem solving, and it's a way that we can visualize success. So, for example, if you have a big presentation coming up, you can use guided imagery as a way to imagine completing and being successful in doing your presentation. So daydreams tend to get a bad rap but they certainly have some upsides to them. Let's talk now about meditation. Meditation is a learned technique for focusing attention that can bring about an altered state of consciousness. It is a way to focus your attention to help eliminate the chaotic thoughts that crowd the mind and can create stress. There are many techniques that can be used as a way to get into the meditative state, including repeating a mantra, chanting, using one's breath, counting, focusing on a single point like a candle flame, for example. There are many other examples and techniques that can be used, and we'll be exploring some of these in class, so I will keep this list brief for right now. Let's talk about now some of the benefits of meditation. They include reducing stress and increasing relaxation, helping to improve concentration, brings about cultivation of peace of mind, increases blood flow and oxygenation. And remember when we were talking last week about stress and the benefits of breathing that helps to oxygenate the body and the mind, blood, the muscles, and can improve health in so many ways. Can also help slow the heart rate, boost the immune system. It also increases serotonin production, which can bring about a sense of emotional well-being. Meditation research has suggested that it can aid in managing symptoms in conditions like anxiety, ADD, asthma, depression, sleep problems, and high blood pressure, just to name a few. Also, a Harvard researcher compared the brains of meditators to a control group and found that the parts of the cortex responsible for attention were, on average, 5% thicker. That certainly could be an aid in improving concentration. Psychoactive drugs are another way we can intentionally alter our state of consciousness. Psychoactive drugs are drugs that influence a person's emotions, perceptions, and behavior. They are typically addictive and produce a biological or psychological dependence in the user. Psychoactive drugs have been used for thousands of years, ever since humans have been aware that certain chemical substances can change their behavior and influence their mood or their sensations. The three types I'll be talking about now are stimulants, depressants, and psychedelics, and I'll begin with stimulants. Stimulants are psychoactive drugs that enhance the activity of the central nervous system, causing an increase in heart rate, blood pressure, and muscular tension. They're drugs that can temporarily elevate mood, increase alertness, and also increase awareness. Some of the drugs that are classified as stimulants include caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, amphetamines, and some prescription drugs. Let's look at caffeine first. Caffeine is considered one of the most widely used psychoactive drugs in the world. It can be found in coffees and teas, chocolates, and soft drinks. Caffeine has some beneficial effects, such as increasing energy and mental alertness. However, heavy use can cause anxiety and insomnia. Caffeine is also physically addictive and can cause some withdrawal symptoms like headaches, fatigue, and irritability. Nicotine is in the top 3 of most widely used psychoactive drugs in the world, although the research for medical uses for the drug that there is left and for apparent and reports of apparent and benefit. Depressants, on the other hand, impede the nervous system by causing neurons to fire more slowly. Have you ever been prescribed pain medication after surgery? If so, you were probably prescribed an opioid, something like morphine or codeine. Have you ever wondered why your body seems to relax after having a few drinks? It's because alcohol is also a depressant. Depressants are drugs that slow down the activity of the central nervous system. By decreasing the electrical activity in the brain, depressants produce a calming effect in the body and slow down the brain's normal functioning. Depressants can decrease your level of awareness, lower your pulse and heart rate, and also reduce breathing. For these reasons, depressants are also referred to as downers. Depressants can cause relaxation and calmness in smaller doses, which can result in a reduction in anxiety and lower inhibitions. However, depressants taken in larger doses have some very serious consequences, including complete loss of consciousness, respiratory depression, loss of senses, and even death. Some examples of depressants are alcohol, opioids, which, as I mentioned previously, morphine and codeine, also heroin, Rufinol, which is the date rape drug, and barbiturates are also in this category, which are typically prescribed by physicians, which help to induce sleep and reduce stress, an example being Valium. Okay, now let's talk about hallucinogens or psychedelics. These are drugs that produce hallucinations or that change the perceptual process in some way, which distorts the brain's processing of sensory experiences. When under the influence of these types of drugs, people often report experiencing rapid, intense emotional swings and experience profound distortions in their perceptions of reality, including delusions and false notions. In this state, people see images, hear sounds, and feel sensations that seem real, but do not actually exist. Some examples of hallucinogens or psychedelics are marijuana, MDMA or ecstasy, LSD, mushrooms or psilocybin, peyote, and PCP and mescaline are also another example. In order for a drug to affect our behavior, it has to get into our bloodstream somehow, and there are a number of ways that can be done. Through ingesting, which means eating or drinking the substance, inhaling, which means heating or burning the substance and then breathing in the fumes, absorption, which is done through the mucous membranes of either the mouth or the nose, or injecting, as with a hypodermic needle. And once in our bloodstream, psychoactive drugs influence our behavior by altering the functioning of the central nervous system in some way, which we saw with stimulants and depressants. That's it for this lecture. And just to say that we will be exploring many of these concepts that I've talked about in this lecture in class.